Welcome to another episode of the Lofthouse Group Podcast with me, Ryan Gorman, Director of Lofthouse Group, where we interview interesting people and thought leaders within the architecture and design industry. Today, I'm joined by Ed Hayden, who's one of the directors at Scott Brownrigg. He heads up design and innovation, leads on commercial and life science sectors, been working on some really interesting projects in Cambridge, but we'll get into that. Ed, thanks so much for joining us. Pleasure to have you on.
Hi, Ryan. Good to be here.
Great. I guess I've known of you for a while because you're pretty active on social media and posting about the projects that you work on and sustainability and I guess creating a greener environment, something that's very close to my heart. So I'm very much aware of what you're doing. But I guess for the benefit of the audience, if you've been with Scott Brownrigg nearly 20 years, could you give us a bit of a background on yourself and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I actually left school and studied engineering. So I've got an engineering background. So, I know a bit about the science behind, sustainability. So that's quite good. And it helps me, helps drive my passion for science and innovation as well. So, I come from an engineering background originally. And then I went into computer games, and I did computer game design for about 6 years, working
awesome.
for the likes of Electronic Arts, so I've also got quite an interest in I think the representation of architecture in terms of 3D, interactive environments, that kind of thing. So really, I've brought those two passions together in architecture so that you get when on the projects that we work on as a team, we tend to explore everything in the new game engine technology that's out there, and Unreal 5 is the latest version of that, and that's going to change the way we explore design and architecture. Mm-hmm. And then I think it also gives you a really good way of interacting with clients and being able to see and experience the projects together before they're built. Mm-hmm. And then that goes along with testing in 3 dimensions how your buildings work sustainably in terms of the position of the sun, the way they react to the wind, that kind of thing. So it's quite a kind of rounded but interesting way of looking at technology and architecture together.
I had no idea. I'm glad you brought that up. I had no idea that you'd had a gamer's background. It's really interesting because I suppose this probably segues into something slightly different, but you see a lot of people who are architects right now have come through the very traditional route of, part 1, part 2, part 3, always wanting to be an architect. It's quite rare to see people transition across to that. How did you... From working in game design, how did you think, architecture is where I want to be?
So I studied engineering and then I wanted to be an architect. I went into architecture and this is quite a while ago now, obviously. And there was the start of 3D Max was in the architecture studio. So I picked up 3D Max when it was back in the days of DOS and started playing with it then. And then this is a funny story, I did a show and tell at the end of my architectural training at Autodesk, and a guy came out of the audience and employed me, and it was Brian May from Queen. So my first job was working with Queen on their, he said, do you want a job? And, what could I say? So my first job was working on a Queen VI, which is a computer game. You can look it up. It's still there on YouTube. So, and then computer games for a while, but architecture really. Computer games was a bit of an aside, really. But
interesting though how I guess an aside. I'm really into games, and I've had to convince my wife that games are gonna. My daughter's only 1, and I'm like convincing her why she should be able to play games. I'd read studies a while about that why there was a link between why people who play a lot of gaming can be good at architecture, and apparently when you play there've been studies that show when you play a lot of first-person shooter games that people have got a better ability to visualize things in 3D.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and I think a lot of the games, the exploratory style of games, they are all about that kind of problem solving in 3D, and there's a lot of crossovers now. I think increasingly you're going to see the technology that's been developed for computer games, drifting into more and more fields, and especially architecture, and that overlap between virtual reality, augmented reality, architecture, computer gaming technology, all of that is going to merge and become very much part of our future. So I think, yeah, it's a natural coming together. You know,
do you think that games like Minecraft will help encourage a new generation of architects to come through?
I would like to hope so. I think if you look at the latest toolkits that you're seeing in games, you know, you can build real-time environments that look totally real, you know, from your bedroom. So I think you'll certainly see a lot more creative exploration of architecture, in the same way that computers have allowed people to be creative in the music industry, you know, from their bedroom, kind of, you know. I think you'll see a similar thing, and then that will translate, I think, into architecture. The tools for architecture have always been, you know, 20 years out of date compared with all the other industries, and I think we're finally kind of catching up, which is a relief.
Really, really interesting. So I guess coming on to your architectural career and the types of projects you have worked on, did you have, or have you had any, I guess, passion or focus on any projects historically that have then led you on to where you are now? Like, give me a bit of an overview of the types of projects you've worked on in the past and where.
Yeah, I mean, I've done, if you like, the full range of different style of projects or different sectors, you know, from residential to business space to science and tech. I think some of the key projects which I found really interesting that have changed the way I've thought have been about the sustainability aspects and how you get creative in sustainability. And I did a project called King's Troop, the Royal Horse Artillery, down in Woolwich, and it was to take 160 horses and then work out how to sustainably to house them. And we used the concept was to use the waste bedding and manure to power the whole development. So that was fed into a boiler system that powered the development, and then that provided enough spare heat that you could use the heat engines to generate electricity from that and feed back into the grid. So it's yeah, so that was really one of my first high, you know, better than zero carbon projects. So you're actually taking waste and turning it back into energy. So yeah, that was pretty good. And then that I've always had a bias to find if you like, a working solution to sustainable issues. It's not about greenwashing a building, it's about making it actually work, you know. And so whenever the opportunity arises, and it doesn't always happen on a project, you know, you should push the sustainable agenda and get buildings to be absolutely as sustainable as possible.
That was something I was going to ask, kind of introducing green aspects and low carbon aspects to buildings. Is it something that are clients interested in it if it's not financial? Does it have to be financially viable, or does it have to be within certain budgets for clients to be interested, or are clients proactively requesting greener buildings nowadays?
I think in the last 2 to 3 years, the whole mindset of clients has changed. Let's say about 5 years ago, you would have to really push a green agenda, and it was seen as if anything, an annoyance to the market, you know, to the clients, you know, and a bit of a tick box exercise. Now I think the whole mindset's changed entirely. Clients are looking at how to build the best buildings for long term, and how to get, you know, and that's got to respond to the tenants or the people that are selling buildings to. And it's really high on everyone's agenda now. So you know, and we know that this is going to be something that you have to do anyway, because the government will demand it. So we will get to we're starting to see the first steps towards really getting to net zero carbon in buildings, and that means in construction and operation. And that's where the future lies. So how do you build a building which doesn't require any carbon for its construction? And then how do you run it for the next 25, 30, 40 years without using carbon? And that's an interesting challenge and something we all have to face, going forward. And I think it will make buildings better. It will make buildings better. It will make environments better and more enjoyable. And it's just something people are demanding. So developers are responding, and clients are responding to that demand.
So when you sit down with a client who, let's say, is interested in their new project being green or low carbon, what are the main considerations that you have to take into account when you're kind of scoping out the project?
Yeah, we take this a view. It's what we call a fabric first approach, and that means that you've got to design it from first principles. In other words, there's no point making a highly insulated colander. You've got to make a building that works passively, and that means you have to look first at the orientation of the building. Which way is it facing? Which way is the sun? Where's the prevailing winds? Where's it shadowing? Is there any water bodies nearby? All these kind of things to start with, and then you design your building with these basic principles about reducing energy need, and it's different if it's housing or if it's commercial. Commercial buildings need cooling, not heating, and most residential buildings need heating, not cooling. So in this country, so if you're taking a commercial building, you've got to make sure that it doesn't overheat, and yet so it doesn't get too much solar gain on it, but also it gets lots of natural light, so you don't have to run the lighting 24/7. So this ground up approach, first do that, then look at the materials, make sure it's well insulated, well air sealed, and then you look at the energy supply. How do you make sure it's going to using low carbon energy? Then you look at renewables, and then finally you look at the extras, which are biodiversity and waste, and to get to a kind of true net zero in operation situation. But those are the drivers, and some sites lend themselves to that, some briefs lend themselves to that better than others.
Well, on that, are there any specific projects that are typically harder to green up than other, or any that are kind of the biggest contributors to carbon in your experience?
I think if you look at office buildings, if you look at office buildings, in the past, you would have a kind of glass boxed office building, which was running on a full pipe fan cooler system, not very sustainable, no opening windows, and built of steel and concrete, so lots of carbon in its construction. And I think those are these big volume buildings are the ones that are the challenge, and the ones where the biggest gains can be made. At the moment, the construction industry accounts for 40% of carbon emissions on an annual basis, and an office building, for instance, will generate 35% of its carbon, of the lifetime carbon costs during its construction. So that 1 year period of construction accounts for a vast amount of the carbon. So designing buildings that are low carbon in construction and low carbon in operation, for that building type is really key to going forward. And of course that goes alongside reusing as much as possible. Any buildings that you can reuse, any parts of buildings that you can reuse is a fundamental.
Well, have there been any examples where you've, I guess, had a site to review, had an existing building to review where it is considered not so green as is, but having to reconstruct? Is this a consideration often that reconstructing it is going to add more carbon than just trying to retrofit?
Exactly. So if you look at buildings that were built, say 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, normally the frame is where there's a lot of carbon costs, the concrete frame. And those older buildings tended to be built to higher loading standards than we would consider normal now. So in other words, the frames are super robust in a lot of these older buildings. And so what you can do is and then often they had very poor performing external envelopes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if those have failed over time, we completed a building in Woking fairly recently where the frame was really solid. It had lots of structure. The outer skin had completely failed. It started kind of buckling and peeling,
Mm-hmm.
and delaminating. So we had to replace the outer frame. So at that point, we could extend the floor plates, extend the building, and make it much more sustainable in its operation.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that by using timber to extend the floor plates, add a new floor onto the top, and then very highly effective glazing systems and solar shading to ensure that it didn't overheat, and you get that benefit of natural light with minimal running costs to get to a BREEAM excellent building in operation. So yeah, it's a key consideration going forward.
The way you talk and the way you explain about considering green aspects in designing buildings, just it makes sense, and it sounds like it would just be the natural way of doing things. And I know there's still very much in architecture a view of there's like sustainable architecture or green architecture is very much its own specialism. Are we going to reach a point either in the education system or in the way that architects practice where green architecture and architecture are no longer two separate things, and actually green architecture just has to be embodied as part of the practice itself?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think if you look at the way we treated health and safety, 10 years ago, it was a kind of bolt on, and now you can possibly conceive of a building which wasn't designed, with that as a prime driver. You wouldn't ever think of building something which wasn't entirely safe. And I think the same thing is going to be the truth of the sustainability agenda. You'll see every building going forward having to meet the very highest standards. I mean, if you're looking at net zero carbon future, and we are, by 2050, the government are going to, legislate that we have to meet net zero. And then and these buildings will be measured at the point of handover at PC. They'll be measured for their embodied carbon, their running costs. It will be, you will have to meet the standards. And that means a certain amount of re-education, but a certain amount of innovation in the way we think about buildings and the way they're designed. And some of those things we're looking at, for instance, are a modular timber construction technologies. So you're using mass timber. So there's materials such as glulam, LVL, which is laminated veneered lumber, and CLT to create frame structures that replace the use of steel and concrete in buildings. And that is part of our future. I think at the moment there's a certain we're moving towards that, and it's the case that as buildings appear where this is done, it becomes the norm and it becomes accepted, and we do it more and more. So it's just a changing attitude, but it's going to change quite quickly. Yeah.
Do you think enough is being done across the industry to hit that target set by the government? Do you think it's achievable?
I think it is. It's definitely achievable, and it's one of these self-fulfilling things where there's a bit of reluctance at the moment in terms of cost, that the greener the building, the more it costs. I think as technology develops, like for example, we've seen the cost of photovoltaics really, dramatically reduce over time, and now it's very accepted that most buildings should have photovoltaic on the roofs, to assist in their renewable obligations. And I think you'll see that across the board as technologies become mainstream. The cost of them reduces, and then they get adopted more and more. So yeah.
Great. Well, I'm really keen to talk about some of the projects that I've seen that you've been working on, in particular, the new project you worked on in Cambridge Science Park. Could you give us, I guess, the audience a bit of for those people who haven't seen it all over, it seems to be pretty well publicized now, so I'm sure most people have heard of it or know of it at least. Could you give people a bit of an overview of what the project is, how you got involved, and where we're at with it now?
Sure. Yeah, we've been. So I was first involved in the science park in Cambridge back in 2008. That's when my first building was finished up there, and since then we've been working master planning and developing designs, and those designs are all have all been completed in that part of the science park now. So we've developed a series of buildings for Tuss Park, who are a science park developer, Chinese-based science park developer, and what we're looking at is building flexible, sustainable, adaptive buildings for the science innovation sector. So buildings that can be laboratory space, life sciences laboratory space, and adaptively change to fit different operations as their life goes on. So really we adopt this kind of loose fit long life approach to buildings. The more adaptive you can make a building, the more it will last, the longer it will last. So the buildings we've just completed is a pair of buildings are known as 1 to 21 on the science park, and that's 220,000 square foot of accommodation designed to be flexibly office or laboratory space, and over 4 floors. But the whole building is designed around this premise of the design for low carbon from first principles. So we have this big curved bladed facade to the west. What's that for? That shades the building as the sun comes down in the west. So as you get the afternoon and evening sun, or the afternoon sun, the building is already warm. It's had a day to warm up. So that afternoon sun, as the sun drops in the sky on summer's afternoon, it really starts to heat the buildings up. So then if you can, we use this big vertical shading system, which forms the key feature of the building to prevent that sun overheating the fabric of the building. So to get to a BREEAM excellent flexible building. Yeah, so it's quite exciting stuff. And that forms the last pair of a series of 8 buildings that we built on the park over the last 8 years or so. Yeah.
So I saw online that you'd been giving some tours around the building. Obviously, I'm not an architect. I'm just a recruiter, but so I don't know what it would feel like to have completed such a project you've worked on for such a long time, and to then finally be showing people around it. Like, how does it feel when you go in there, or how did it feel when you went in there, saw it completed, and were explaining the building and showing people around it?
I think one of the things about these buildings is that they are very much built with teams. No one person can design and deliver anything like this. So it's very much about teamwork and about working across different disciplines. So the structural engineers, the services engineers, the contractors, and the architect, as lead designer, working together. So when when a building's gone, when a project's gone well, is when everyone takes ownership. When everyone says, "I did that," then it's a good project. And the recent ones we've just completed, I think everyone has been. The reason you're seeing it a lot in the press is because everyone's very proud of it. Everyone that's been involved, and so you get a lot of promotion from many quarters. So it's great to show people around. And it's great to explain some of the ideas behind these buildings and why we think they're special and what we've learned doing it. So I think it's about that cross-fertilization of ideas to different groups. I think is really important as well.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. So I can imagine you get a lot of project inquiries, and there's obviously going to be projects that you complete for the practice, and then there's obviously going to be things that you're passionate about. When it comes to you as an architect, what type of building or brief or project really gets you excited?
I think the projects that we particularly like is when they are for owner occupiers. So projects when you get under the skin of the client, you really understand what they're passionate about, what they're trying to achieve, and then you find ways of exceeding their expectations. We've just completed a project for CABI, which is the Centre for Agricultural Bioscience, and they had two passions. They had to they didn't want to spend money. They didn't want to, because they're basically a not-for-profit organization, so they didn't want to spend the money that they receive on running buildings. You know, they want a very low energy building. Running costs was a key thing. They need to spend that money on innovation and helping the poor farmers of the world find solutions to agricultural problems. So we had to design a building which had extremely low running costs, but also captured their passion for biodiversity. That's what their project, that's what the whole firm was about. So that allowed us then to really explore some of the themes we're interested in, this low energy, sustainable design, but also integrating biodiversity fully into the design and using that as part of the energy strategy as well. So, that was a fascinating project for us and one that we really felt passionate about. And so those are the kinds of things that we like to do. Buildings, you want to design buildings that people are going to cherish going forward. If people cherish something, they'll look after it. And that's and to get to that, you really need someone who's who needs a building that means something to them.
Yeah. No, awesome. Because you're based in your offering, I guess, is based in the Guildford office, right? Like, how does that tie in with Scott Brownrigg as a wider, as a wider business?
Yeah. So Scott Brownrigg are over 105 years old now, and the birthplace was the Guildford area, so this is if you like, the historic heart of Scott Brownrigg. Obviously our head office now in London, and but we operate really as and we've got offices around the world, but we operate really as a kind of one Scott Brownrigg approach, which means that what we like to do is to take the skills and knowledge that we gained in in the different sectors and apply that in a kind of cross-fertilizing way across different studios and different projects. So we have a lot of design crits, and where we do work cross practice on that, and look at design and the innovation and ideas and share those across the practice. So the work that I've been doing has been kind of outside generally the M25 and has been in the science and technology sector. But as I say, we cover residential and all the other sectors as well. But yeah, I think it's less geographic than it was now. It's more about this kind of cross-fertilization of ideas. But I guess there are some differences between the different offices, and I think we always feel that we're a bit of a close-knit family in the Guildford office, and it's a fun place to be.
Yeah. So I wanted to have a chat about, I know you've spoken about how the green agenda from the government is driving, driving change from a sustainability point of view. How have you seen, it might sound like a stupid question because obviously there are going to be differences, or you're going to have seen changes, but what changes have you seen in the types of projects you're working on or the requirements of buildings since COVID-19? I saw Darren was being interviewed recently and did mentioned about ventilation. Like, what have you seen new requirements are?
Yeah, we've done a series of pieces of work on building typologies and what the effect of I wouldn't say just COVID-19, but the effect of viral pandemics can be on our future of architecture and what we do and what it does to architecture. And I think whilst we hopefully are seeing the back of the current pandemic, I think the effects of it are going to be quite far-reaching in terms of the way it filters through into the building regulations and the way we design. So some of the obvious ones are that if you take a large office building, for example, we used to have, in the past, we would have 90% recycled air. In other words, the air is recycled through the air conditioning system and cooled, and 10% fresh air coming into those spaces. And I think in the future, you're going to see the opposite of that. You're going to see that we have far higher fresh air rates, where we have, let's say, 90% of the air being fresh air from the outside and 10% being recycled. So you're getting much less chance of viral spread via air conditioning systems, for example. So that's one aspect, but I think there's other things as well. There's a design for surfaces and the contact you have with surfaces. I mean, there's a lot of risk of transmission through surface contact. And so we are looking now, and on many of my projects, about the materials that you select for all of those things. So using copper alloy materials for door handles, for all of your toilet fittings and brassware, anything you have to touch, you want to make it a kind of a hostile environment for viral infection spread. And then obviously looking at contactless technologies, such as contactless taps in your bathroom fittings and especially in washrooms and toilets. So you get contactless equipment. So you'll see more and more of that. So maybe that company kettle gets replaced with a contactless zip tap arrangement, so that you don't have to. So you're trying to minimize the amount of vectors of transmission of the virus. And I think that is certainly, those are two aspects, air and surfaces, but the other aspect is densities and the use of these of office buildings, one of the or workplaces in general. I mean, one of the big things we've seen obviously is now we've kind of leapt forward, I would say, 20 years from the pre-pandemic period to the technology for working from home and existed before the pandemic struck, but there wasn't a lot of uptake of it. We all knew it was there. We all knew Teams meetings happen. Nobody did it. And now, of course, these meetings are almost the standard thing. And so I'd say that it's going to have a long-term impact upon where people work. So I think your workspace is going to become much more a space about collaboration, about social issues, about sharing ideas and knowledge, and less about that focused work, sitting at a desk writing a long report. You can do that at home in your new home office. The stuff where you don't need to talk to people can be done remotely. I think, but some things, some aspects, such as we've taken on new starters in our business over the last 6 months, and obviously then it's very hard for them to either mesh into the ethos of the company or to pick up on all of those half-heard conversations about and get that learning experience if they're not in the office. So I think you're certainly going to see a mix of home working and office work, much more standard going forward. And I think I think that mix will be permanent, I think, in terms of that.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see which practices continue. I mean, look, we're doing this interview right now over Zoom. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what practices that have become everyday now are going to continue, once we can all meet face to face. I've read some really interesting articles by people in the industry about how you forget about how much you learn just by hearing other people, just
exactly.
like that learning
really
by osmosis.
True. Yeah, I think that is true. And I think a certain ethos and if you like the company DNA, the DNA of a firm, very hard to do that over Zoom, very hard to keep that going. I think And I think it's also very difficult to keep a feeling of being a part of a team in place when everyone's working remotely.
Yeah.
And we, in our own practice, we have regular weekly team get-togethers where we all have to share how our week's been, and personal stuff really to keep that going. But I think it's we've also and I'm sure you'll agree with this, we also suffered from Zoom fatigue now, where you're going from one Zoom to the next, and I think those 5 minutes around the coffee pot, and those incidental chats and those incidental discussions are also, highly important and part of the mentality of and ethos of a firm.
Definitely. I think it's because it feels like when you're working from home, and I definitely felt it during the pandemic, that every interaction you have with someone is planned and it's for a specific reason. And in real work, like office working environment, that's not the case, right? You go and chat to people, you'll have just a chat about what people are up to. And I've found that before, that you might be working with people and seeing people every single day, but not actually know anything about what's going on in their life. So it's very hard to kind of keep that culture. I suppose one thing that I've seen from people that are moving jobs or joining new companies is that priorities really seem to have shifted now from, salary and package and that type of thing, more towards flexibility, a company's attitude towards health and well-being. Is that something that you're seeing with people that are joining, and also with people who are already working there's mindset shifting slightly as well? Is it something you're observing?
I think it is, and we've had a lot of discussion about that, and we've run surveys and tried to understand exactly what the motivations and drivers are for people. I think you're going to see people definitely want that flexibility and freedom going forward. So you have to be adaptive to that. On the other hand, I don't think this new way of working is all perfect, because of course there's also things like loneliness and separation, and a lot of that team spirit that creeps in over time. So I think I think a mix of those things is correct. And I think a certain flexibility going forward in companies is going to almost be demanded by staff. Post the pandemic, people are going to still want that flexibility of working arrangements. And I think it would have taken another 20 years to have got there if we hadn't had the pandemic force the issue, really. But people aren't going to give that up lightly, and I think so companies have to respond and listen to that, I think, going forward.
And you know what? I think you kind of hit the nail on the head a bit there when you mentioned about it not all working from home, not all being great, loneliness coming in. And I think it is really key that you do constantly survey and ask people for feedback, because something that so my personal life situation was that working from home was okay for me. I have my own home office. I've got a small child. I've got kind of quite a settled home. And so actually home working is quite a comfortable environment for me. But actually, unless you're asking people, we found that in my last business that there were people who were, younger in their careers, perhaps in house shares, didn't necessarily have family in London, were living and working there. And actually that going to work and spending time with their co-workers was the only social outlet that they were really getting.
Yeah, and I think everyone's circumstances have proven to be individual. You're not going to want to work from home if you're going through a divorce, or you're not going to want to work from home if you're sharing a one-bed flat with a 6-month-old baby, are you? I mean, those things can be difficult. So there has to be a lot of flexibility and understanding. And I think each person's individual circumstances have come to the fore in this regard. And businesses going forward, like ours, have to acknowledge and listen to those concerns and requirements. And each one's an individual case. So I think that's the way people will want and expect the new system of work to be. And I think workplaces, therefore, the design of workplaces has to also respond to that. You're going to see much more focus on collaborative areas, and much more focus on making the workplace a place you want to go to, rather than a place that you feel you have to go to.
Yeah.
So the successful firms, you'll see offices which are really fun, exciting, collaborative, and interesting places to be, to ensure that people still want to go to them.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we've heard about some really interesting projects that you have worked on and that you, I guess, have just finished up on. Like, what does the future look like for you and your team in terms of interesting concepts and projects and ideas that you're working on moving forwards?
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly looking at new projects and opportunities. We've got quite a lot more that's coming to the fore on the in the science and innovation sectors, and I think that's certainly a big part of what we've been doing. I think bringing that zero carbon agenda into our projects going forward is something that 5-6 years ago I would have struggled to talk to clients about, and now they're very open to it. So we're looking at how to design zero carbon laboratory spaces. That's not easy. It's quite a challenge to do that. How to build buildings which are very low energy in operation is still a big passion. And I think and there is a lot of change and development in these areas. We're also looking at the development of fusion. So we're helping a company called First Light Fusion with their projects and looking at their development for that. So fusion energy once again could change the face of how we operate as a company, as a country, because that could provide very low cost energy, very sustainable energy going forward. So there's lots of developments, exciting developments, and we're keen to be part of anything that's thrown at us, really. But so we have lots of opportunities and projects on the cards.
That's awesome to hear.
They're all creeping forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you know what, that ties into the kind of the last question that I usually ask people, and I think I might have a sneaking suspicion what you might talk about. But the last question I always ask everyone is like, what's the biggest topic or issue in architecture that not enough people are talking about, and they should be?
That is interesting. I'm going to say something a bit off beam here, because I think what we're not talking about is the advance of AI systems on architecture and design. Up until now, we've had a kind of belief, and I think there's still a belief in a lot of the design professions, that artificial intelligence systems aren't really something that's going to affect them, because how can a computer design anything? But I think there's already a lot of work being done by the thought leadership staff and innovative thinking about artificial intelligence, and you're going to see that permeate through every profession, and architecture is no different. And already there are people working on systems that can actively plan flat layouts on the fly as requirements change. So pull a wall around and it plans a flat, and it can meet all of the regulations. So I think we'll see a new over the next 5 years. I think we'll see a new way of working, which is that every architect, every designer has alongside them a kind of AI digital assistant who will do a lot of the mundane work very, very quickly. And so I think that, alongside things like parametric modeling and automatic manufacturing processes, you're going to transforming the profession of architecture into more what you might call the kind of digital craftsman, where you can design and manufacture parts of your buildings directly. And so we've seen touches of this already, with people experimenting with digitally printing houses, from concrete machines, and also there's a bridge that's been developed in Copenhagen, which is in Amsterdam, which has been printed. So I think these aspects are going to be fundamentally change how we work and design as architects, and early adopters of this stuff will be ahead of the field later on.
Well, that raises another interesting question, which is like, how is the role of an architect going to change if all of a sudden a portion of workload is taken away from you and eased up, and you're freed up that time?
Yeah, because I think it may be the opposite way around. I think it may free up the architect from the mundane. In other words, endlessly adjusting door schedules and things like that. The stuff that no architect really wants to do. To freeing up their time to be more design driven, and if you've got a digital assistant helping you, making sure your fire regulations work and you're co-compliant in terms of spatial calculations, then maybe you're then freed up to spend more of the time designing and thinking about what the future of architecture looks like and operates, rather than does it meet the regs? So,
do you think that this means that, well, maybe just guessing here, but do you think that this means that the role of architects is going to have to become more multidisciplinary, or I think
the whole practice of architecture and design is going to become, if you look at the makeup of an office in the future, we'll have programmers, we'll have 3D visual artists built in, we'll have code writing. There's going to be much more of an emphasis on building technology that allows you to create things than there is on people the old-fashioned 100 people at drawing boards kind of mentality. So I think you're going to see the structure of architectural firms looking very different, and containing all sorts of people, psychologists, for instance, people that you wouldn't expect to have seen in the practice, and that new discipline of architecture will have to incorporate many different aspects in order to meet the challenges of the future and the challenges of this changing and evolving toolkit and design landscape we find ourselves in.
I think that'll be really interesting to see how that looks in the future, and I completely agree with you. AI and tech has dominated most industries now, and it's just interesting to see that the uptake within architecture hasn't quite been.
Not yet. It's on its way.
Yeah, let's see. Well, no, look, Ed, thank you so much for joining us today. We've got through so much interesting stuff here, and thank you for everybody who's been watching. Anyone who's been watching or listening, what I'm also going to do is in the description on this YouTube version, I'll be linking to Ed, I'll be linking to Scott Brownrigg, all the things that Ed's been talking about. If you want to find out more about him and what they're doing at Scott Brownrigg, I'll link everything about Lofthouse Group if you want to hear more about what we're doing. But for everybody watching and listening, thank you. And again, Ed, thanks for joining us.